The Warden is arguably Minecraft's deadliest mob, with it having multiple attacks and gimmicks at its disposal to make itself a living nightmare for every player to go up against. But have you ever wondered what this blue blinded beast would look like in Mario Maker? I did. Well, not wondered, but wanted to bring that same nightmarish evil into Mario Maker. So that's exactly what I did. And looking back at what I made, I can say it turned out a lot better than I ever could have hoped for. So if you end up enjoying this video, please consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. But with that said, here's how I recreated the Warden in Mario Maker 2. Now going into this, I had no clue how this fight was going to be structured, or what enemy I would use as the Warden, or how hard I wanted it to be. But before I could even begin figuring any of that out, I need to first add the element this whole level would revolve around, the darkness effect. When a Warden spawns, it'll affect every player within its radius with that effect, essentially making it impossible to see anything other than what's directly around you. To make that effect, I was going to need the Night Ghost House theme in order to use what I'll call the Lights Out exploit, which, as the name insinuates, makes the lights go out. The reason this works is because the lights that enemies emit almost function like a sort of secret entity limit exclusive to the Night Ghost House theme. If you're not familiar with the term, entity limits are basically the max amount of whatever object you can put in a level, or that can be loaded in while playing a level. There's currently 3 different types of entity limits in Mario Maker: the ELA, ELB, and ELC, with the one I just mentioned being a 4th one, the ELD. They all function in separate ways, but the one we need to focus on for now is the ELD. ELD is the max amount of light a level can produce in the Night Ghost House theme before it no longer can, and once that limit is reached, the level goes completely dark. Unlike the other 3, there isn't an exact number as to how much light you'd need, since different objects will produce their own amount of light. But most agree that boo rings are the best when it comes to working with this exploit, since they produce a lot of light while also conserving the most amount of space in the ELA, which is the max amount of objects you can put in the level editor. So now that you're somewhat familiar with all this entity limit shenanigans, I can explain how this whole thing works. After some testing, I figured that I needed around 62 boos in an area for the effect to work. And you'll know it did work if when you play the level, it becomes fully visible? Yeah, for some reason the screen lights up if you play it in the level editor, but it'll work like normal once you play outside of it. But it means that my setup worked. Except it didn't. See, there was a problem with this setup. It was limited to one area, meaning if I ever walk too far away, the level will return to normal. So I probably had less than 48 blocks worth of space to make a level with. That's not even 2 screens. Needless to say, this was a problem. I first tried using boos on tracks to make sure the boos never despawn, but it didn't work, since like I said, the light that objects emit are their own entity limit. So while putting objects on tracks keeps them from ever despawning, that doesn't affect the light surrounding the object. Fortunately, I did come up with a different solution. One that finally made me realize how I wanted this Warden level to be structured. See, the average player's experience with the Warden essentially boils down to these 3 things. You're bad at the game, so you accidentally summon it, start running as it chases you, and then spawn some more in the process until you either die or escape. But the keyword here is chase. If I could make my version of the fight a chase throughout the level, then that would solve my problem of the lights out exploit going away. And you'll understand how soon enough. This is where I started getting a clearer vision of the level I was going to create. The idea was to create one platform that stretches across the entire level. Above the player, there would be boos on tracks moving to the right to make sure the lights out exploit was always active. And to make sure the player didn't just stop running and let the lights get ahead, I would add autoscroll to the level, forcing you to always go right. Then have the Warden, I still didn't know what I was going to use as the Warden, chase you throughout the entire thing while also having some obstacles in between. My chat and I both thought this was a good idea, so I started construction. Until I realized one thing. The amount of time it would take to add all those tracks. Remember, I needed over 60 boo rings for this setup, which means I needed over 10 tracks stretching all the way across the arena. Yeah, that wasn't going to be too fun, but I got to work anyway. Also, while Past Me is doing all of that, I wanted to let you know that I made a new Discord server. You can talk about Mario Maker or any other games you'd like, and maybe even get to help test future levels I'm working on. It's also a nice way to interact with my community, so you should join in. Link will be in the description. After finally finishing what felt like a side quest in one of those open world games, things were finally starting to set in motion, because after testing the level, the lights out exploit was clearly taking effect. But another problem quickly rose up, one that I actually first saw coming too. Objects on tracks actually move faster than the autoscroller at its slowest speed, which means over time the boost would go off screen. Now, like I just said, I had a feeling this would happen, and my solution was to have the tracks point vertically for a brief moment so that the boost would stop going forward, allowing the auto scroll to catch up. But what I didn't foresee is the sheer amount of tracks I would have to change to make this work. Like, I seriously did not expect to have over 10 tracks in the level, and I wasn't really thinking if there was a more efficient way of setting up the boost so that I use less tracks. But there was another solution: custom autoscroll. Instead of having the autoscroll moving at the same speed at all times, I could use custom autoscroll and set it up so that when the boos were close to going off screen, I'd switch to a faster speed until the boos are far enough behind. So I began playtesting to see when exactly the screen went back to normal and changed the speed a couple blocks before. And after a little while, I had it working. But there was still one last thing I needed to do before moving on from making the darkness effect. See, it wouldn't really be fair if I had you play a 30+ second level where you can't see anything, while also trying to avoid an enemy chasing you. So instead of having the screen being dark at all times, I instead wanted to have the screen go back to normal periodically so that you could see whatever enemy I was going to use as the Warden, and yourself. But this meant I couldn't put it off any longer. I was going to have to do the one thing I had been trying to avoid this whole time: making the tracks go up. I was going to have to go through the pain and suffering that was having 12 individual tracks go up, then back down, multiple times throughout however many screens, and this time, there wasn't a workaround. Except I lied, there actually was. While I did have to move the tracks up, I didn't have to move all of them. In fact, I only needed to move 1/4 of them. This was because when the top 4 rows of boos went up, enough of them went off screen to cause the level to revert back to normal for that duration, until I brought them back down. So now I just have to repeat this process over and over again, until I realized that the boost stayed up for too long, forcing me to redo the whole thing. Anyway, I was finally done setting up the darkness effect, which in hindsight was only 1/3 of the level, because I still need to have something chase you and also add the obstacles, but this was definitely the biggest section of the level, and I no longer had to worry about it. Next was the enemy. My chat and I have been brainstorming some ideas as to what could be used to best represent the Warden's moveset, which turns out it only has like 2 attacks. It's melee and sonic boom, which is kinda weird to think about considering how deadly it is. But anyway, most of us agreed on using a Monty Mole since its natural behavior is to chase after the player. Then I decided to add a Zappa Mecha Koopa on top of it to represent its sonic boom attack. I wasn't too sure how well this would work, especially in tandem with the autoscroll limiting Mario's movement, but I was pleasantly surprised. Well, not entirely. See, I soon realized that you could just simply kill the mole and invalidate the entire fight, as you now just held right against the screen waiting for the flagpole to show up, and that obviously wasn't good. So I first added a muncher to the top of the Mecha Koopa, which helped a little, but then I realized that the mole's enlarged hitbox made it possible to hit the mole, and pretty easily too, and I couldn't just take away the mushroom I gave the player since that would make it way too unfair. Now I was just clueless. So I began looking around the level editor, seeing if there were any other solutions, until it caught my attention: clear conditions. If I gave the player a reach a goal as Super Mario clear condition, it would prevent the player from killing the mole, since you'd take damage in the process, making it impossible to beat the level. Now you're probably wondering, okay, how is that any different than not having a mushroom at all, since if you just take damage once, you just lose? And to that I say, it isn't. My past self wasn't smart enough to realize this very obvious flaw in the level, and it wouldn't be until way later on that I realized this and chose a better enemy to represent the Warden. But for now, I just cluelessly rolled with the setup. Next, I decided to add power blocks on tracks that would act as lights to illuminate the areas where the lights out display wasn't active, because even though you can now see, it was still only a small area that was visible. But what I didn't realize is that adding these powers was getting me dangerously close to the enemy/gizmo entity limit of 100, and if I didn't have enough, I wouldn't be able to add the proper obstacles later on, like saws, lifts, or bullet bill launches for example, which would severely nerf the level. Don't get me wrong, I wanted this level to be fair, but also hard, because the Warden is hard. Or maybe this is just my way of taking out my frustration of my Warden experience on everybody else. But after adding all the powers, I made sure to do lots of testing and make sure they illuminated the proper areas before moving on to the final section. Now that I had the blindness effect set up and had an enemy to represent the Warden, I could finally begin adding the obstacles in between. My plan was to add a couple enemies that would show up when you could see, and also have a couple lifts that could act as a lifeline and have you dodge the Warden if you were lucky enough. Fun fact: mobs can't actually spawn in the deep dark biome, so technically adding enemies was taken away from the authenticity of the recreation. But we don't talk about that. But I liked the idea, so I started placing things down, and not even a couple of items later, I see this. this was a pretty big problem, and one that had me a little concerned since I didn't have nearly as many obstacles as I had wanted. I first tried looking at what I didn't need that could be removed, but almost everything I had was required, and removing even one boo ring made the lights out exploit no longer work. Then I just started coping and tried to work with like the 5 object limit I had left, trying to see if I could make something work, but obviously that didn't work. So I had to resort to my last option: use what I have. As in the other core parts that were inside to the enemy/gizmo event, not those 5 objects. Instead of using lethal weapons like saws and bullet bills, I could use something that would prove to be much more deadly. That's right, the bumper. Don't know how many of you guys were expecting to hear that, but to make it make sense, I'll give you a little context. See, ancient cities, which are the structure where you can encounter the Warden, are exactly what the name implies: cities, and as such, are filled with a bunch of different paths separated by walls. This makes summoning a Warden even more deadly, because a lot of times you'll summon one by mistake and panic trying to run, but just run into a wall. And because the darkness effect is already active, you're kinda just running in multiple directions hoping you'll find the path out. And next thing you know, the Warden is up and you're dead. All just to say that the walls surrounding you from everywhere play a pretty big role in why the Warden is so hard to escape from. So if I could incorporate that same element in my level, that would immediately solve my enemy/gizmo entity limit problem. Now, making corridors isn't something that's too hard to do, but the problem is when you add enemies to the equation, which can't go through most solid objects. And that's where the bumpers come into play. An object that the player can't go through, but enemies can. Essentially acting as a wall, but only for you. And believe it or not, this felt just like running into a wall while being chased by the Warden. Especially because when you ran into the bumper, it made this sound effect that instantly made you realize what happened. I had that same exact sensation of, oh god, I'm stuck. Oh, I'm so dead. And as I said before, I like to focus on recreating the same sensation you have when playing through the original of whatever I'm recreating, not just having it being a one-to-one remake of it. So while it wasn't a literal wall, I was very satisfied with this. I also mentioned that I wanted to add lifts that could act as a lifeline if you were lucky, but with my limit being almost completely used up, I decided to use mushroom platforms instead that you could jump onto, as well as some vines to climb up and avoid the Warden with. Speaking of Warden, this is where I finally realized my stupid flaw with the reach to go as Super Mario Kart condition, and after thinking about it a little more, I remember that angry wigglers also follow Mario. So I put a large one in and added a Zappa Mecha Cuckoo on it, and tested it out. And I can't lie, I like the wiggler version way more. Mainly because it moved at a much more reasonable pace than the mole, but at the cost of difficulty. So to make up for that, I added another wiggler closer to the end of the level, which actually made sense since you can spawn multiple Wardens at once. But more importantly, this got rid of the issue I'd had for so long. Unlike moles, wigglers can't be killed by just jumping off of them, and the Mecha Koopa was also saved because of the muncher on it. But after that, I had added all the obstacles I needed, and the level was essentially complete. Or at least that's what it would seem like to most players. I've done a lot of explaining as to how this level is structured, and my thought process throughout it, but playing it still made me feel like something was missing. Maybe because I was the creator and I was underselling my own work, or maybe it's because the Warden didn't have as many attacks as I'd like to make the level more involved, but something felt like it was missing. And then it hit me. You don't just spawn in a Minecraft world and then suddenly the Warden is sprinting at you, ready to be nightmare fuel for the next couple of nights. You need to make your way down to it first, and that's what was missing. A cave actually leading down to the ancient city. Of course, building a cave wasn't possible because of the limited space I had, so I made a vertical sub-area and immediately got to work. Now all I needed to do was add decorations like buildings, vines, and fuselage blocks that represented Skulk Shriekers. Now the level was truly complete, so let's check it out. Alright, so here's the level. Let me know what you think of the thumbnail. Warden art. I tried my best with that one. I'm just gonna hop in and, kind of explain some stuff. Alright, so first start with the cave. I'm not gonna bother trying to go through like the different paths because I don't want this video to be super long. But this is the path you're supposed to take. And you're wondering why there's like blue ice all over the place. I was trying to make ground essentially. And then I realized while making the level, there's nothing that's actually, green. I mean green blocks specifically. You got like snake blocks and stuff like that. And then you have pipes, which don't really work all that well as, blocks that you place all over the place. So I had to go with my next best option, which was blue ice blocks. So yeah, that was pretty fun. I said I wasn't gonna go through a different path, but I'm kind of just stalling here so I can say what I need to say. But yeah, that's pretty much the cave section. It isn't too difficult, especially if you're watching this, because you just know which path to take. All right, well, let's go into the actual interesting part. So, the dark part, the Warden chase. This was very hectic to make because, as you know, as I was showing in the video, there was a lot of problems that came up, but thankfully I was able to fix most of them. This is probably going to be a lot harder for most people. For me, it's not too bad because I kind of, as I was making the level, I kind of formulated my own way of going through it, so I kind of have a pretty good understanding of how to, where am I? Oh gosh, I say that and then I'm choking. Okay, let me clutch up right now. Yeah, it's probably gonna be harder for most people because you can't really see anything, or like, you don't really have a route planned out. Like I have a route planned out essentially. Like I have an idea of what to do this, but I'm probably gonna die right here because of this part. Okay, hold on. Okay, we're good. Yeah, so this is probably gonna be a lot harder for most people to play through. It's gonna be a lot of trial and error, but I kind of like that. I want it to be hard, but also fair. So there's the level. I'll have the course ID in the video, like in 2 seconds or something. But yeah, I tried my best to make the level as tough as it realistically could be, while also making sure it's fair and accurate to the original. So if you decide to try it out, leave a comment on the level or on this video to let me know how I did. And you should also check out this video right here where I made a super world with over 30 levels focusing on creating Skyblock and Mario Maker 2, starting from a small island to eventually taking on the Ender Dragon and Wither. Also, shout out to Bedrock Gaming who donated on stream to have his name said at the end of the video. Thanks, Bedrock. But anyway, until next time, bye! Also, don't forget to join my Discord server.